When Google's Threat Intelligence Group pulled apart the Coruna exploit kit, what they found was staggering in its scope and precision. This was not some slapped-together collection of borrowed code. It was a comprehensive arsenal containing 5 complete iOS exploit chains, each one a self-contained pathway into the iPhone's defenses together. These chains leverage 23 distinct vulnerabilities. That number might not mean much on its own, but in the world of mobile exploitation, finding and developing a single reliable vulnerability takes immense effort. 23 represents an investment of resources that few organizations on Earth could muster. The kit targets iOS versions spanning from 13.0 all the way through 17.21, covering years of Apple's operating system releases. What struck researchers most was the engineering behind it. All the exploits are not isolated or disjointed. They are connected through common utility frameworks, built to work together seamlessly. Google described the framework as extremely well engineered with pieces that fit together naturally. Some of the more advanced exploits use techniques that have never been publicly documented. These are not copy-paste jobs pulled from security blogs or previous leaks. They represent original research into corners of iOS that few people outside Apple's own engineering teams have ever explored. That level of sophistication comes with a price tag. Security experts estimate that developing exploit chains of this quality would cost millions of dollars. The technical skill required, the time invested, and the sheer number of vulnerabilities assembled all point toward nation-state backing. This is not the work of a lone hacker, or even a typical cybercriminal group. It bears the hallmarks of government-grade surveillance tools, the kind built by contractors for intelligence agencies with budgets to match the engineering alone. Tells a story of resources, patience, and purpose that goes far beyond what profit-driven criminals typically possess. So how does Coruna actually take over an iPhone? The answer lies in what security researchers call a watering hole attack. The name comes from nature, where predators wait near water sources because they know their prey will eventually come to drink in the digital world. The concept is the same. Hackers compromise popular websites that their targets are likely to visit, then wait for victims to arrive. When someone visits one of these infected websites, Coruna springs into action. The framework injects hidden iframes into the web page, invisible elements that the visitor never sees. These iframes quietly load malicious JavaScript code in the background. But here is where Coruna shows its sophistication. Before attempting any exploitation, the code first fingerprints the device. It figures out exactly what iPhone model is being used and which version of iOS is running. This matters because different iPhones have different hardware capabilities, and different iOS versions have different vulnerabilities. Coruna needs to know precisely what it is dealing with to select the right attack. Once it identifies the target, it loads the appropriate WebKit exploit. These include vulnerabilities like CVE2 in 24 to 23 and 22, CVE 2022 to 48,3, and CVE 2023 to 43,000, each designed to exploit specific weaknesses in how iOS handles web content. But exploiting WebKit is only part of the challenge. Modern iPhones have additional security measures, including pointer authentication codes that help prevent exactly this kind of attack. Coruna has developed techniques to bypass these protections. As well, the entire chain executes silently. The person browsing sees nothing unusual. Maybe they notice the page takes a moment longer to load, or maybe they do not notice anything at all. Meanwhile, their device has been compromised. This is what makes watering hole attacks so Dangerous, the victim does not need to download anything or click a suspicious link, simply visiting the wrong website at the wrong time is enough. The journey of Coruna across different threat actors reads like something out of a spy novel. Except it is all too real. In February 2025, Google first spotted pieces of the exploit kit being used by what they describe only as a customer of a surveillance company. This was likely a government somewhere using the tools for their intended purpose, targeted surveillance through compromised websites. Then something strange happened by July 2025. A more complete version of Coruna appeared on Ukrainian websites hidden inside something as mundane as a visitor counting component. The domain cdnuaccounter.com looked innocent enough, but Russian espionage group UNK-6353 was using it to target specific geolocations, the very tools that may have been designed for Western intelligence. Operations were now in the hands of Russian spies targeting Ukrainians during an active war. But the story takes an even darker turn. By December 2025, researchers discovered Coruna on fake Chinese finance websites. This time, the threat cluster, UNK-6391, was using it for pure profit, stealing cryptocurrency from Chinese speaking victims. A sophisticated espionage tool had somehow made its way into the hands of common criminals. What connects these three groups? How did a toolkit that likely cost millions to develop end up in so many different hands? Nobody really knows. Google suggests there is an active market for what they call second-hand zero-day exploits. Someone somewhere is selling these powerful hacking tools to whoever will pay. It could have been a leak, a rogue employee, or perhaps the tools were sold multiple times by their original creators. The mystery remains unsolved, but the implications are clear. Once a sophisticated hacking toolkit exists, controlling who uses it becomes nearly impossible. When iVerify's researchers dug into the Coruna codebase, they found something that caught their attention immediately. The inline documentation and explanatory notes scattered throughout the code were not just written in English, they were written in native-level English with the kind of phrasing and technical terminology that suggests the authors grew up speaking the language. This might seem like a small detail, but in the world of malware analysis, these linguistic fingerprints matter. Most hacking tools that originate from non-English speaking countries show telltale signs in their comments and variable names, awkward phrasings, or grammatical quirks that betray a non-native author. Coruna showed none of those signs, but the language was just one piece of the puzzle. iVerify's analysis revealed that Coruna shares technical hallmarks with hacking modules that have been publicly attributed to U.S. government operations in the past. These are not vague similarities. We are talking about specific coding patterns, architectural choices, and exploitation techniques that match what security researchers have seen in tools tied to American intelligence agencies. Perhaps most telling is the connection to something called Operation Triangulation in 2023. This campaign targeted employees at Kaspersky, the Russian cybersecurity firm. The Russian government was quick to point fingers, claiming the operation was the work of the NSA. The United States never confirmed or denied those accusations, but here's where it gets interesting. Components of Coruna match techniques used in that very same campaign. It is the same toolbox, or at least parts of it showing up again in different hands. Rocky Cole, iVerify's co-founder and a former NSA employee himself, put it bluntly in his assessment. This represents something unprecedented. It appears to be the first documented case where tools likely created for or purchased by the US government have spiraled completely out of control, ending up in the possession of both foreign adversaries and criminal enterprises. The implications are sobering. Tools designed for targeted government surveillance have somehow made their way into the wild, where they can be bought, sold, and repurposed by anyone with the money and motivation to use them. For years, the iPhone hacking world operated under a fairly predictable pattern. Sophisticated exploits were expensive, rare, and carefully aimed. When someone spent millions developing a tool that could bypass Apple's defenses, they used it sparingly. Targets were specific individuals, usually activists, journalists, or political figures. The goal was intelligence gathering, not profit. That's how surveillance vendors like NSO Group operated, and that's what security researchers came to expect. Coruna shattered that model entirely. What made this campaign historic was not just the technical sophistication, it was the scale and intent. Instead of a handful of carefully selected targets, Coruna was deployed against anyone who happened to visit infected websites, Chinese-speaking users interested in cryptocurrency or gambling, Ukrainian citizens browsing local news sites. These were not targeted operations, they were dragnets. This shift matters enormously. It signals that the barrier to entry for advanced mobile exploitation has dropped dramatically. Capabilities that once required state-level resources are now circulating among criminal enterprises. The same toolkit moved from a government customer to Russian intelligence to Chinese cybercriminals. Each transfer represents a step down the ladder of sophistication, but a step up in terms of who might be affected. The implications are sobering. When spyware tools become criminal tools, the victim pool expands from hundreds to potentially millions. The motivation shifts from surveillance to theft, and the expertise required to launch these attacks becomes less about developing new exploits and more about acquiring existing ones. Coruna represents a watershed moment. The question now is whether this becomes the new normal or remains an outlier. The Coruna saga reveals something that should worry anyone who owns a smartphone. There is now an active market for what security researchers call second-hand zero-day exploits. These are hacking tools that were originally developed by well-resourced organizations, often governments, that somehow make their way into the hands of other actors. Once that happens, the tools can be reused, modified, and adapted to target new vulnerabilities. The original creator loses all control over where the code ends up. Google's warning here is stark. Multiple threat actors have now acquired advanced exploitation techniques that they can adapt for newly identified vulnerabilities. This is not a one-time leak that gets patched and forgotten. The underlying methods and frameworks can live on, morphing to attack different targets. Long after the original vulnerabilities have been fixed. We have seen this movie before, and it did not end well. When the NSA's Eternal Blue exploit leaked in 2017, it was originally a government tool designed for targeted surveillance. Within months, it powered the WannaCry and NotPetya ransomware attacks that crippled hospitals, shipping ports, and businesses worldwide. The damage ran into billions of dollars. Eternal Blue showed what happens when sophisticated government tools escape into the wild. Coruna represents a similar pattern. But now we are talking about mobile devices that people carry everywhere. This raises uncomfortable questions about mobile security. In an age where government hacking tools can slip out of controlled channels, iPhones have long been considered more secure than most devices with Apple's closed ecosystem and rigorous app review process. But Coruna demonstrates that even the most carefully defended consumer devices can be compromised by tools that were originally built with government resources when those tools start circulating among criminal groups and hostile nations. The security model that protects billions of phones starts to look far more fragile than anyone wanted to believe.